Hi, good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever everybody is. A warm welcome to everybody for our webinar today on the science of pay benchmarking, a deep dive in case study. I am really excited to be here along with you. I'm even more excited today because I have two of my very good friends, Christian and Anthony, joining me as on the panel today to talk about this topic. Certainly, I think hits at least everybody in reward, but I think across the HR function as well. I've known Anthony and Christian for almost about 10 years. I think all three of us have roughly spent about 10 years in Unilever and survived somehow. And most of all, and I'll do a quick introduction, but I think both these gentlemen are two of the nicest people I know. So it's a real pleasure for me to have them here. I'll quickly pass over to Christian and Anthony to just quickly introduce themselves. I've also asked them to share with all of us one or two things that's top on their mind right now and that's taking up their time. So maybe I'll start with Christian, you first.
Thanks, Ajad. Good morning, everyone. Very quickly, in terms of, I would say, career and background, I have been a consultant for 10 years with what used to be Hay Group, which is now Hay Group Conferry. And then I spent another 10 years, as Sajad says, in Unilever, mostly in Asia and Southeast Asia. And for the last 5 years now, I've joined a global pharmaceutical company called Sanofi, French pharmaceutical organization. What am I busy with? Actually, that's the reason why I left the background that I'm currently using is because we are here launching this week our global recognition platform, which is called Bravo, which takes some of my time at the moment, and also because we are early June, sorry, end of May, early June, we are also managing the current vesting of our share price, our shares. So it's an interesting process to handle. It's just normal stuff that we are doing at the moment, so nothing big that keeps me very busy.
Thanks, Christian. Anthony.
Thanks, Sajad. Thanks, Christian. Well, I think to make it short, okay, my name is Anthony Loka, right? I am if I look back my career, probably I am kind of following Christian. So I was working for Christian back in Hay Group during consulting days. Yeah, so I left Hay Group less than 7 years with them and to join Christian at Unilever. And I spent about 10.5 years in Unilever, and now I am heading GoTo as the head of reward. So in GoTo now I am in my 9th month and surviving. So top things that we're doing right now, I think number one is everything actually. So it's about doing harmonization for the company. Yeah. So as with many startups, GoTo started as a startup, and many a times as a startup, we have to build the bridge as we are crossing it. And also we are going through a lot of merger and acquisitions. So you can imagine that the company has way too many separate systems, terms and conditions, processes, pay benefits everywhere. Yeah, so the number one thing we're doing is really harmonizing the entire organization right now. Yeah, back to you, Sajad.
Thanks, Anthony. Thanks, Christian. I'll talk about talent accelerator towards the end of the call, so I want to keep the focus on the topic at hand, which is basically pay benchmarking / salary benchmarking. So let's get started. This is a fairly casual, setup. So I have a few questions that I have prepared to ask Christian and Anthony, but maybe in about maybe 15-20 minutes time, we'll be very happy to take questions from any of you on the call as well, directly as well. So let me just quickly start. In case any of you are not from a reward background, let's just get started from, I guess, point A, which is basically what is pay benchmarking, what is salary benchmarking. And as I was thinking about this just a few minutes back, I was like, yeah, I don't know how do you define pay benchmarking and salary benchmarking? We've been doing this for years and years, but if a non-reward person asks you or asks us, what is pay benchmark? How do we define it? So maybe I'll throw that first question to Anthony. You in your mind, how would you say what pay benchmarking is?
Well, I think at the foundation of it, right, at the basic level of it, the pay benchmarking is all about, it's about a process to compare, analyze salaries, benefits of jobs, right, within the organization. Yeah, and we compare that across industries, across geographies, across location, even across different function, yeah, in the market, right? Ultimately, why are we doing those comparison is to determine competitive and fair compensation level, okay? With the goal of course, ensuring that an organization's compensation practice aligns with industry standards or market condition, or aligning with the organization's philosophy, culture, etc., strategies. Yeah.
Thanks. Christian, any views?
No, it's I follow Anthony. It's about alignment, but not only about alignment. It's also whether if you decide to be above or below the market. It doesn't always necessarily needs to be totally in alignment. It's a company decision. It's a company policy also.
Mm-hmm. And so, like, if you know, in a daily, I guess, pay benchmarking, salary benchmarking work that we do, if I was to ask what are like the 4 or 5 big ticket items that in your view we must always consider before getting into any exercise, what would they be, right? So I'm basically trying to get into the science of it. So Anthony, you talked about it's a process, right? Process has many steps, right? In your view, what would be like if a new exercise comes to you and says, okay, we're going to do this for the first time, it's never been done, let's say for GoTo, you know, and it's going to be the most comprehensive exercise that we've ever done. What would be like the 4 or 5 big ticket things you would think that we have to do this for a job to be well done?
Yeah, I think before even we go into those ticket items, right, I think we need to understand that the pay benchmarking itself is not just science, right? It's both art and science to it, right? The science part is, I think all of us know, it's all about collecting reliable data, doing market research, right? Those are the science behind it. But not to forget, the very important part is the art part, which is interpreting those data, right? And making informed decisions, because those are the areas where we have a lot of considerations. Yeah, so if we were to, combining the two, the art and science of it, I would say the science part, what's important is for us to prepare job descriptions. Yeah, roles and responsibilities have to be very clear, right? And from there, we look at how to determine the different job levels, because when we want to do pay benchmarking, we have to benchmark against certain universal language, right? I think that's where typically where consultant comes in, giving us those universal language for us to be able to compare jobs across, yeah, like Mercer position class, Hay Group reference levels, Towers global grades, all those that enables us to then compare jobs across market. So I think that number one is really that job description responsibilities for us, that helps us to do job matching, looking at job levels, I say, yeah. Second thing is to know our segmentation, like what we're looking at, right? What industry are we benchmarking against, which geography we're looking at, what region, or are we going into even job family function? Because ultimately, where the job operates is where we want to benchmark against, right? So we need to understand all that, yeah. Even location is make a lot of difference, right? Because at different locations, certain skill set would differ. Yeah, demand differs, competition differs, economic factors differ, even cost of living would differ. And those are all items that would impact pay benchmarking. Yeah. So I think all in all this probably covers under segmentation, where we want to look at which area to benchmark against. Yeah. Still on the science part, I guess it's really then the data source. How do we get the data source? Are we doing it ourselves? You know, but typically, obviously, many companies will be engaging consultants to have a fair approach to do this, and more anonymous approach as well. Yeah.
Makes sense.
Yeah. And the last part, I think, if I were to sum up all the art part, it's really about the how we look at the entire total reward piece, because when we're doing the pay benchmarking, it's not just looking at salary, right? So it's really looking at the whole totality of it, because it's critical not to just look at guaranteed pay. Yeah, we have to consider short-term incentive, long-term incentives, benefits as well, because ultimately the combination of all this is where we look into the data, and then we'll see, okay, to fit with our company strategy, our company goals, how we want to be known of as a company, where we can tweak, right? Ultimately, whatever pay benchmarking and ideals you have, if the business can't afford it, you can't afford it, right? So therefore, I think to summarize it, then these are the 4 things. Job description, responsibilities, job grades, all those, segmentation, the data source, and total reward, I think.
Thanks. Lovely. I think that's fairly logical and sequential. I think makes sense. Christian, any views?
Sorry, I just changed my background because it was hard to see myself in a dark background. No, I think Anthony, you did a good summary. I would just add one view, which may be going against a bit what we are talking about at here, is first of all, you need to ask yourself, do you need to do benchmarking? It's very important to go through that step. And do you need to do it every year, or is that a process that has to be recurring? I don't think so. Personally, I think there are instances where you need to do benchmarking, and there are a lot of time where you don't need to do it because you have done it, because the markets are very stable, because the organization has not changed much in terms of compensation structure, and the markets where you are operating are not changing also. So this is very important that you step back and you think whether you really need to do salary benchmarking. For those of us who are here in the room that are compensation and benefits people, or total reward people, or even consultants, we tend to have the first reflex to say that part of our job is to do salary benchmarking. It may not be necessarily true. Okay, we don't need to do it all the time. We have a lot of other reward, big ticket items to handle in our jobs that we don't need to do benchmarking every year.
Okay, makes sense. If I can take a step back and say, in your view, because I have a very strong view on this, some of the companies that I'm talking to right now, when we talk about pay benchmarking, what I'm realizing is actually sometimes the problem is not pay benchmarking, right? The problem is sometimes a little bit of in terms of the organizational design, the way, and like Anthony talked about the job descriptions and the jobs, the issue is more around how the company has designed the jobs or the structure, right? To me, pay benchmarking, you'll get whatever analysis you'll do. But if the org design, the structural part has not been solved for, then pay benchmarking in itself becomes a bit ineffective. I mean, it'll help to an extent, but you're not really solving for the real root cause issue, right? So any views on, in your view, like before you get into benchmarking, what would be your advice to, for example, the companies you're working for, or even previously, what comes before pay benchmarking in your view?
I think we are talking about the same thing here. Anthony mentioned earlier that in his organization, there's a lot of acquisition at the moment. Not acquisition, Anthony. Alignment of different harmonization of different organizations. That is a time when you need to do benchmarking. Maybe the step after you need to do benchmarking. Once you have harmonized and you know exactly that you have a stable structure, then you do a one-time benchmarking and you know where you stand. In organization where the structure is stable and you have clear job description, clear accountabilities, and you have done the salary benchmarking once or twice already, maybe you don't need to do it every year.
Yeah. Anthony, any views in your view?
Yeah, I think coming back to this fundamental question, right? I mean, what Christian just asked earlier about why do we want to do pay benchmarking in the first place, right? I think, and before we ask that question, we need to really drill down and pin down what that is. it brings us back to question, what is the company culture? What is the company strategy lies, right? This is where company needs to be able to define first what their talent strategy is, yeah, and therefore subsequently be able to define what the reward principles are, right? So for us, the current challenge that we're facing is really having that entire compensation philosophy that enables the organization to do, talent mobility, move people from one entity to another, different countries, yeah, moving forward. And then obviously it needs to be simple enough to administer. Right. And then how the compensation structure can, sustain in the long run, right, for the organization. Yeah. Also not to forget career progression as well, right? So pay benchmarking only give us the information where what the market is saying right now, right? And data gives us in multiple different percentiles. So how do we then take those information based on where the company strategy lies and fit that in to the philosophy?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Sajid, it's important to go back also to the point of the art and the science. The art is even more important when the science is fading, because we have faced and we are still facing a lot of poor data management, poor database, places where we don't have very reliable data, or industries where we don't have reliable data. So this is where also when you do salary benchmarking, you need to bring in a bit of your personal insights or your I would say competitive intelligence insights.
Yeah. So let me just build on that. Like, I know that poor market data has been a challenge, I guess, for decades now. And to top it all, even like Anthony, to your point, even companies' own data, sometimes the data quality is not of that level, right? So thrash in basically means thrash come out. But assuming like that is okay, like poor market data has been a consistent problem across industries, across markets for a long, long time. What do you do if assuming the market data is absolutely garbage? Like, I've had a couple of instances like where I used every science that I knew. I couldn't make sense out of it, right? Like, what do you do? And maybe in your experience, if you came across something like that, what did you end up doing in that case?
I think the problem is that you only know the data are garbage after you've used it. And it's usually the problem. Anthony and I, we have been consultants here, and as consultants, I can tell you that your guess is as good as mine. Databases are good, okay, they are built usually they should be built in a consistent and solid manner, but it's not always the case. And when it's not the case, and unfortunately you see flaws in the way you receive data, then it's your job for those of us here who have experience in compensation and benefits or reward, your market intelligence, your knowledge of the market is as important as the quality of the data. So you need to be able also to interpret and to do your own research by going to your peers, by going out in the market and asking the right questions too.
Yeah, fair point.
Just to add on one point there, right? I think, obviously we have to go out ourselves to go and do it sometimes to understand the info. I think another thing is we can focus internally as well, right? Look at our own internal parity in the organization, right? Evaluate where that internal state is, right? If internally we are also already all over the place, I guess the market data does kind of tell what it is as well, right? So these are, at the end of the day, it's two sides of the coin as well. So internally we sort out ourselves, and then we can check against the market.
Makes sense.
I just have one question. Sorry, Siddharth, if I can interrupt.
Yeah.
So you talked about the data being really not valuable and crap. What if there is no data at all for maybe some unique positions, or you're starting a new business and those jobs are very unique? So in that situation, what is the best form of art do you recommend, or any steps, any guidelines when we don't have market data?
Creativity, Omar. You can always go back to the principle of the bigger sample. Yes, there are jobs that do not exist. There are industry that are nascent. Then you go to the next closest industry, if it exists, or the next market, which is a bit bigger, if it exists. To the point where at one point in time, you go even try to go to the general market. But you know, when you analyze data and you do benchmarking, you always take a range. Okay. And you have to use the full power of the range. Okay. When you have, even you look at your internal pay scales, when your internal pay scales or your range outside are going from, I don't know, 70 to 130%, it's good enough to fit in all new jobs. And if it still doesn't, it's still not the case, then you miss the first year, but you do it right the second year. It's the way you learn on the data. It's the way you build your own knowledge of the data of the market. And it's the same way the consultants are doing anyway. So that's why I go back to my point that your guess is as good as theirs.
Yeah. And I guess you're right. And, you know, the tough part is convincing the business, because they might just come up with their own numbers, and it's very challenging to, you know, here you're trying to give them some idea, but they need evidence for that. So sometimes they might quote high, you know, that, oh, so and so position gets this much, and that's where your benchmarking principles come in, the percentiles and all that. But I understand what you're saying. It's how well you know the market, so you're able to sort of back it up with perhaps data. Yeah.
So two things to add there. Sorry, Krishnan, go ahead.
No. I just wanted to complete by saying that I've had in my own experience times where for new jobs, instead of relying on whatever the market was trying to tell you, we created the market yourself. You do it yourself. You just decide how much, and if you are a market leader, then
you set the rules.
Yeah, you set the rules.
Great. I was just going to add, I think the two data points that you could use. One is, I don't know how many companies do this, but apart from the salary data, you have access to basically what the talent acquisition team collects, because they talk to maybe 7 people and we hire 1, right? So if you can identify a process whereby the talent acquisition team is actually collecting data points for anybody that they interview, that's gold mine as well, because that's basically live data points, right? If you can build a system where you can equalize that data into, however you need it, I think that could be very well, could be very of great value. The second one is, I think, to what we're discussing, and at least for me, that's been very important in my last job, because in some of the markets, for example, in eBay in Australia, the problem is that we are the largest player, and the companies that we actually compete with, they don't actually participate in salary surveys because these are the large retailers, right? So they don't participate in surveys, and they basically hire from us, and we sometimes hire from them. And the usual challenge for a number of years has been like, how do you use them? Because anybody else that's participating in the survey, basically, it's useless for us. And I think that to that extent, your own network comes into play. Even in like a lot of benefits benchmarking work, Christian and Anthony know that, we'll just message each other, by the way, what are you doing? I've got my own other networks where, and sometimes you don't have the time to wait like 3 weeks to hear back because your leader needs an answer quickly. And I think building or having some sort of an informal network to get that information fairly quickly, I think it really, really helps.
Great, thank you.
On that point, talent acquisition, Sajad, you also need to factor into account that more and more pay equity principles are bringing companies to not ask for salaries anymore. So slowly, we are not, and we don't. We are coming to a point where we are not going to ask salaries from people anymore. So you have to be able to take this into account also when we do that benchmark.
Fair enough. Good point. We have a question from Eric. May I understand your views regarding the granularity of survey benchmarking data? Broader approaches like job family, career levels, which is grades, or more effort-intensive granular approach like market pricing by jobs, where data might not be available due to low participation count. So I guess, Eric, please correct my understanding. You're asking around whether how far and how deep we go in terms of benchmarking. So do we stick around like at the grade level, family level, or do we go as much as sometimes at the job level trying to find out benchmarking? Because obviously, as you go into jobs, individual jobs, obviously, there is a very likely possibility that data at that level might not be there in terms of pure data points against each jobs. Anthony and Christian, any view on that? Like, what's your preferred view and approach to benchmarking? How high level or how deep do you go?
Yeah, if I can start, right, I think ultimately, it's how we interpret those data that we have, right? You know, if take for an example, you know, let's say if a company who is an oil and gas company, right? If we say, okay, I want to benchmark against the oil and gas company, who's typically on average, oil and gas companies are probably the average of oil and gas probably sitting at, let's say, P75 of the general market, for example, right? So average is already at P75 of the general market. So that's one data point we can look at, right? When we are looking at where we want to place them I suppose this data, this question comes from, you know, the unavailability of data, right? So if you know that the average kind of sits at P75 of the general market, so maybe we can take that as an approach to look at general market and look at those P75 and how we look at the data points over there, right? In terms of how granular you want to move in, because that's kind of the trend today we are seeing as well in the market, right? More and more we see a more need to put more personalized reward, right? In the olden days, you know, it's easy to just create one structure for the whole organization, regardless of where you are. But in reality, today we do see and observe a lot of differences and a lot of gaps in there as well, where one function to another function can have quite significant difference in terms of, you know, hot skills, niche skills. Nowadays, I think the amount of niche skills out there are quite diverse already, right? And we do see a lot of companies slowly moving into looking into functional specific benchmarking. And that's where the granularity of looking into each specific function happens, right? And as a com and ben practitioner, I think this is where we need to find the balance on how, when we're looking at the whole organization structure and all the different functions within the organization, where does that balance lie? Right. I'm not sure whether I'm making sense, but you know, when it comes to looking into those granularity, if let's say we're looking into a specific function that is quite nascent in the market, but it's really up and coming, and we don't have enough data there, and as Christian has mentioned earlier as well, right? When we're looking at those information, we can see where on average they sit. Coming back to my example earlier about oil and gas, you know, let's say if the oil and gas information is kind of like not enough, right? Insufficient data there, but we know that they, on the average, they kind of sit on the P75 of the general market. That can be another reference point where we can look at, for example.
The only thing I will add to what Anthony has said is that based on my experience, sometimes we get too much into like, we need a lot of details, we need a lot of analysis, right? In my experience, salary benchmarking by grade in 90% cases is enough. I'm actually not, in fact, personally, I'm not in favor of doing analysis even by functions, right? Give you an example. If you do functional analysis, you will find most probably or not how much differential you will find between functions. So for tech, I can tell you, of course, for those working in tech, that okay, tech we know drives a premium in certain markets, right? So when I do our pay benchmarking, we know in India, China, and US clearly has a differential in tech versus non-tech. So there it probably makes sense, and that we do analysis tech versus non-tech. In most of the markets, even where we feel there is a differential, there is none. For all other functions, that's where the salary range comes into play, right? So to Christian's point, if you have a 70-130, chances are that even if there's a 5, 10, 15% difference, your one grade salary range is going to take care of all that differential. So if you have functional ranges, if the differential is only 5, 10, 15%, I think you're getting into a lot of work for maybe no reason. If your ranges are wide enough, then your differential of functions and jobs would be covered within that range. So my personal advice, or at least unless you're finding very specific issues around certain jobs, maybe we still do it by the job family. I, at least in my whatever, 16 or 18 years, haven't gone into like job specific. Like we know, for example, again, AI drives a premium in the market right now. Anything data is a premium, but AI and data sits under the tech function, right? So I wouldn't necessarily go specifically into AI and anything data, maybe to understand, but I won't go specifically job by job and spend so much time. And look, we have this problem in eBay, in the tech industry, but we'll still do it by tech and non-tech, and we'll have the range cover for that, and we'll say, okay, for AI and anything data, we'll just put them on the premium. We'll make sure, regardless of the performance, nobody's paid less than 100% of the tech range, and so we'll use the range to drive that. Christian, any views on that?
Just an illustration. I've always been fond of one pay scales for the whole company. Let's be honest. And then you manage it all in one pay ranges. Then you also need to consider your stakeholders. Recently, it's true that I've moved to a more functional pay scales approach. Maybe one or two. You said it, tech, non-tech, pharma, non-pharma. It works, okay, because you need to handle stakeholders. And it's easier maybe to explain to them that you have made the effort to go there. There are corporate function and there are business function. Yes, it works. Now going back to the question from Eric, I always found market pricing by jobs useless. Well, let me be totally frank, because it's a flow of competent people to always think that that's the only thing that we know how to do. The more granular we are going, the better we are, which is not the case. I think I've seen so many consultants coming to us 1 year with market pricing and the next year with market pricing that are 40% different, just telling us that's the reality of the market. And the year after they come back, it's 40% lesser, and they say that's the reality of the market. So we have to be able to always draw the big picture, and granular approach to me, it's not very useful.
Yeah, fully with you, Christian, on that. Thanks for that. Next question we have from Atta. What pay strategy a company can adopt in an inflation environment to retain the talent? Specifically, let's talk about hyperinflation, right? So in your views, if a country is going through hyperinflation for a consistent amount of time, which we've seen, for example, Pakistan is going through that, we've got Argentina, Venezuela, Turkey, what pay strategy could you do to retain talent? I can maybe let me go first on this. So I know, Atta, where you're coming from. Look, I think there are a couple of things you can do straight away. Basically, what other companies have done is, and first response is you have a combination of anywhere between salary adjustments that sits on top of merit increases. So there's a performance-driven factor. So that's what we do every year. But you could do a standard inflationary adjustment, 10-15%, depending upon how much hyperinflation you have. Many companies will do a one-time cash bonus to ease pain. So all of a sudden, for example, last year in December, where UK utilities bill went up by 50%, a lot of companies said, we'll give them a 1-month cash bonus. So immediately it doesn't hit your disposable income. So anywhere between a flat adjustment to all employees, regardless of performance, 1-month cash bonus is something that you could do. I think if it gets really, really bad, which is the case we've seen in a few years back in Zimbabwe, Venezuela, and Argentina, some companies would start to peg salaries to dollar. So because now you're talking inflation in terms of hundreds and thousands of percentages. So rather than getting into it month by month, you say that we'll peg every job to this dollar value, and then regardless of how your inflation moves, at least your dollar value is at least taken care of. So I would say those are the couple of things that I've seen in terms of practice. Anthony, Christian, any views?
No, agree with you, Sajad. We also need to be able to know what is inflationary environment. Have to be careful. 9% is maybe not much for Turkey or for Argentina, but 9% is a lot for Germany, okay, and France. So you need to be careful where you want to intervene. Okay, and you have to be careful in defining what is the real inflation. Maybe in Pakistan, 20-30% is a lot. But for Germany, 9-10% is a lot. So focus your attention where it really counts.
Yeah, makes sense.
Yeah, well, one thing maybe can consider as well. I think at the end of the day, when hyperinflation hits and inflation hits, we also kind of have to see, the core root of it, like how long would it last as well, right? I mean, for continuous ones like the Zimbabwe case in the past, obviously there was, or Venezuela, I think that has been kind of, we've seen through the history that happened. Yeah, but whatever that's happening now in certain areas, how bad is the situation? We kind of have to really look into it, because is the situation able to, depending on the economic conditions, right, whether it can turn around or not in the country, right? So in some companies I've seen, they've actually introduced, in Sri Lanka, for example, last year, they actually introduced like a fixed, they don't build it into the salary, but it's kind of like allowance, inflationary allowance to support, right, which can be taken out at the end of 2 years or 1 year period, instead of building it directly into the salary, for example.
Yeah, nice example. Thanks. I guess next question. Anybody? I guess open up. Any questions from anyone else?
I'd just like to dwell a little bit on the inflation question. So what if the inflation does not translate into an increase in terms of the P&L when the company is very domestic focused? So should the company still intervene?
At the end of the day,
no, go ahead, Anthony.
Yeah, and then I was asking if the company can't afford.
Yeah.
Yeah, at the end of the day, if the company can't afford, the company can't afford, right? It's we have to balance what we see in the market versus the business affordability from that sense, right? Obviously, if you force to pay it and the company don't sustain, the company can't continue operating. That's not good for everyone in the organization. I think that's where the reality hits, and we have to see what we can do. And we do see in all honesty, companies who have to consider scaling down because of the situation, and in order for the company to continue sustaining. And this is where really have to relook into where are all our critical talents in the organization, and really have a good look into the whole organization, right? And make the right decision for the long-term sustainability of the organization.
I would add that maybe not everybody needs a salary increase, just to add on Loka, right? So if you don't pay your top 3 levels, I mean, nothing is going to happen to them, right?
Yep.
But obviously the bottom 2 or 3 levels, even that 3% makes a big difference. So, and your top 1 level will probably fund about 30-40 of the whole level, right? So I think even if you have a small budget, I think how you use that budget. So if for example, in Singapore, if you have average 3.5-4%, you say that we can only afford 1%, right? But that 1% can actually easily, to a good extent, fund the bottom 2 layers. Because top guys are getting very high salaries, maybe 10 times of what a lower guy is getting, on top, bonuses and equity and all of that. So I think how you distribute that small amount, you can still probably pay some of the employees at the lower level. At least give them something.
I think this is a very good point, relating back to what is the intent and principle of intervention. If the intervention is really to address the purchasing power of the employees, then allocating to the lower income employees actually makes the most sense.
Yeah. And I think just to also add in what I saw in COVID, a number of companies do, is that the senior management took a pay cut. I mean, obviously that was like, really exceptional time, but if a company is actually going through, and actually that I've seen that startups as well recently, I'm talking to a number of them, where because of market dynamics, some startups are really, really struggling because the funding has dried up, as you know. We're going through a funding winter. The top management decided that they will take a pay cut, but then they decided to fund the lower guys through that pay cut as well. So again, that's the other thing you can do, that if you've got limited budget or no budget, maybe the leaders can maybe take a small cut, which can then fund for the lower levels. We have a question from Wei. With the latest transparency law in the US, the annual base salary posted in JD's real. Does reward team have a broader range they work with internally? And do you guys get interesting question challenges from APAC candidate when they compare the numbers with the US? Christian?
we spoke about the US yesterday with Sajjad. Yes, the annual base salary range posted are real. Well, they should be real, and there's no reason why they should not be real. And do you guys have interesting question challenge from APAC employees? No, most of the time they are, unless they want to apply for a job in the US, which can happen, but people don't usually compare their salary to the other side of the world. If they see offers in the US and they have questions, it's easy to explain to them that we're talking about a totally different market. And we are also talking about a totally different way of managing total reward and taxes also. It's nice to have the US salary, but don't forget that you also have the US tax. So it's, well, usually, no, I don't have much question about the US numbers, but if it happens, it's easy to explain. And we do not have much problem with pay transparency in the US. The implementation was quite smooth.
Loka, any views?
Yeah, I think nothing much to add on top of it. Yeah, I think definitely if any of such question comes up, just tell them the reality of the tax there as well, right? So that would typically tone down the conversation already.
The one that I have gotten was the flip, actually, where some of our US colleagues were challenging our APAC numbers for senior level, especially in China, because they were like, oh, we're getting, let's say, we're paying 200 to 250,000 US dollars. And we know how things work in, like, for senior levels in India and China. And they're like, oh, if you convert the Indian and the Chinese, currency into US for the local pay for senior guys, they're getting more than what the senior US guys are getting. And I mean, the reality is, it is what the market is paying, right? So, for senior roles in India and China, they do make actually more base pay to that extent. But then the US equity values are a lot higher than rest of the world. So I think there's basically the balancing. So, I haven't seen that challenge, Vivek, on the APAC asking for US by and large. Any other questions on the call before I go to my next question?
Hi, Sajjad. Naba here. I just have a question, and this is related to inflation. So we've talked about, hyperinflation, and I do feel that it's still at the discretion of the management how much they want to adjust. It's still a bit controllable, but there are specific benefits that are built into your package. For example, your car allowances. Now, in Pakistan, in the last 1 year, car prices have increased phenomenally, and some have even doubled. Now, the way we did it was car prices were benchmarked to a certain car and a model, right? And because of the increase in prices, and because, for example, for some grades, car prices have doubled, how can we control this element of the benefit? Because this hits the company a lot in terms of financial impact. So I just want to know, how can we control this?
Let me take a stab, and then Christian and Loka, from your experience, if you have anything. So I think a couple of things. I'll add to basically what Christian said, that we're still seeing, so this is coming to almost 2 years where we're seeing a hyperinflation point in Pakistan, where we're seeing about 40-45% of inflation. To your point, car values have almost doubled or even tripled in some cases. So I think what I'm seeing is that some companies have taken an approach where they're like, we'll take the hit because the car value is what it is. So if somebody was entitled to a Toyota Corolla, and Toyota Corolla from 3.6 million is now 8 million, the company is going to take that hit, right, if they can afford it. Because basically that's what they benchmark they want to maintain competitiveness of that basically level with the market. The second one, what they're doing is, there's a combination. Some companies are saying, we will give them an allowance of sorts. I think Anthony mentioned as well that it's a short-term allowance to basically fill the gap for the time being. Because I think what is not known is how long this inflationary period is going to continue. We don't know how much more appreciation of those cars we will see. We don't know actually if the car prices are going to come down or not, right? So there's a lot of unknown. And you're absolutely right that the P&L impact is massive, right? So if it's a small company where you're only giving cars to maybe 10, 15, 20 people, no problem. It's still controllable. But for larger conglomerates, larger companies where you have hundreds of employees getting cars, it's obviously unsustainable. So there's no direct answer, I would say. Different companies, depending upon affordability, some have already increased the values, the benchmarking values. Some have moved into cash allowances. But I do know for a number of companies that it's still wait and see. They have revised in general because obviously if your car prices have doubled or car allowance, if you had a car allowance, that allowance doesn't mean anything anymore. So there has been some changes. Many companies have not moved to what the current value is because of the unknowns right now. Too many unknowns. Anthony, Christian, any views? I know this is very specific to Pakistan. It's car is a big deal in Pakistan. So, but yeah, if you have any views, please.
Yeah, and just one example, I think recently, not too recent, this was pertaining to Turkey back then in Unilever. Yeah, so I think there are a couple of considerations were being made, right? I mean, we started off with giving allowance, and then the company decided to, at least sign off on a, longer lease with a company to provide for the whole organization. Yeah, shifting the cost to control in the long run, kind of like hedging the inflationary cost from that perspective by leasing the cars up front.
Yeah, okay.
Those are another option can be considered, but of course, the company needs to have the resources to do that. Yeah.
All right, I think we have time for 2 more questions. Anyone on the call want to ask a question before I go to my list? Okay, maybe I guess my next question is to both of you. I guess it's more pertaining to what you're doing right now. Like, are you facing in your current job any challenges around pay benchmark? I know Anthony mentioned a few things because it's harmonization, it's M&A, all of that. In whatever you're going through right now, what is your biggest challenge? Is it market data? Is it the simplification? Is it putting everybody on the same level? What's your biggest challenge right now in terms of pay benchmarking?
I think the biggest challenge is boiling down to the art of it. Yeah, it's about convincing the stakeholders what should be the one approach that her whole company is going for, right? Because all the leaders would have very strong opinions on how they want their team, their organization to be benchmarked.
Yeah. Thanks, makes sense. Christian, from your perspective, I mean, I know you're looking at the global portfolio, so, very wide array of practices by markets. What's your biggest challenge right now on pay benchmarking?
So I've got a lot of countries coming up to me and doing the salary benchmarking and telling me this is where we stand. We have done the due diligence, we've got the benchmark, we've got the data, we've got the analysis, we've got nice graph, nice PowerPoint. And my point back to them is, so what? Now that you've done it, what is your next step? Okay, what are you going to do with that? If you have found out that you are below market, at market, or above market, what is the next step? Can you afford an adjustment? Are you able to make changes? Have you even thought about it? Have you discussed this with your business? So this is mostly all the question that I send back to them, and it goes into a black hole because it doesn't. This is not the kind of conversation we have anticipated. So these are questions that you need to think when you do benchmarking. Not only that, I think benchmarking is it's an important tool to know where you stand, but mostly done in base pay. I think Anthony said that at the beginning. You need to consider your total reward. Okay, and most of the time the benchmarking stops in the middle of the road, and you need to do it fully. And when you do it, usually you realize that you're not so bad actually. I'm talking about general cases, but if you do the work in total reward, it usually gives you a different picture than the one you have had in base pay.
Makes sense. Great. Any other question on the call? All right, what I'm going to do is I think we'll put an end to the call. Before we go, I will request, I guess, 2 minutes from you. I know I shared a little bit in the beginning, or rather I didn't share, basically what we do in Talent Accelerator, just for the benefit of anybody who doesn't know what we do. So we are an HR tech startup firm, started in August last year. This is basically a summary of what we offer, both in terms of advisory services from a design implementation perspective. We have built in-house custom programs, 3 programs in Reward Academy, performance management analytics, and employee value proposition. We've got a couple of tools, one of which I'm hoping to launch the job evaluation tool next week. This is our approach to compensation. So, we've talked a lot about total rewards, and essentially that's what we do. It's not just about pay, but it's about looking at the entirety of it and benefits. Again, those of you who are in reward would know that wellness is now playing a very, very important role in how we look at our offerings to employees. And to that extent, I think performance management and analytics and all the other things are equally important in terms of how we look at the total design. Our areas of advisory services is anywhere between building something from scratch if you don't have, designing and implementation. We talked about cost management, which is very important. I think I've spent a lot of time around cost management, and then all the other areas, whether it's pay benchmarking, analytics, org design, job evaluation. Last thing to share is, like I talked about, we're very excited to launch our first tool. This is a new job evaluation methodology. We're calling it Tariff. I would say that this closely mostly resembles to what the Aon Hewitt methodology is, JobLink, in terms of design. The reason for doing this is simple. I think if you look at the last 18 months, 2 years, 80% of the new jobs that are coming in are highly specialized jobs, right? At least in my experience, you're moving away from more generalist job, but more into specialized jobs. You look at technology as an example. We used to have software developer basically doing 18 things, right? Now we have front stack, we have back stack, we have AI, we have data engineers, we have data architectures, very specific jobs, specialized jobs, single skill set jobs. And same is happening in HR. We never had people analytics jobs before, right? We never had pure benefits or comm jobs, but we're seeing them now. So one of the reasons for developing this more methodology was to make sure that we're able to balance both your normal sales and marketing jobs, which hopefully will continue, but also how do we look at these highly specialized jobs? A guy who's basically doing Python the whole day, how do you equate that job? Because when we talk about pay benchmarking, that comes later. I think Anthony talked about, and Christian talked about, we need to think about the overall structure first. And I think the intention of this tool is to look at the structure, the nature of jobs, how do we equate jobs internally and externally, and then we do the rest of the things. So we're hoping to launch this next week. Any of you interested to know more, please reach out to me. Very happy to provide details on all the services and tool we provide. Again, thank you so much for joining in. Appreciate all your questions and engagement. We will put this on our YouTube channel, this video, so you want to share with your colleagues and team members. A big thanks to Christian and Anthony for providing your views, and to everybody sharing questions. Please take care. Have a good day. Have a rest of the week, good week, and thank you again for joining. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Take care, everyone.
Thank you.